Good evening.
Good evening. Hello. Hello again.
Hi, I'm Reverend Abby Rhodes.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah.
And I'm and I'm Reverend Matthew Taylor. It's good to see you. Good to know you're with us this evening.
Yeah. Yeah, Matt's doing all the technical as well as presenting. So yeah, I think we can allow him a slight delay as he
Yeah.
works out the buttons. Um, really glad that you've joined us tonight for our second in our series of life stories of faith and hope. We're aware there's kind of some big events going on in the world today, so it's brilliant that you're with us. So thank you for joining us. Um, we are excited to welcome Godfrey Armitage today, who is a member of our congregation and also leads on the diocesan environmental work, some of which he may or may not touch on as we talk through his story. But he's done an awful lot of other things beyond that and before that. So really excited to hear your story. Welcome, Godfrey.
Welcome, Godfrey.
Nice to be with you.
Good to have you with us. I just wanted to double check as we were starting that I know one or two of you tried my life hack from last week. I'm sure you had a bowl of cornflakes and you pushed your finger in and you tried that out. I know we've already asked Godfrey if he's got a life hack. If he hasn't, we'll find one for ourselves again, but it won't involve cornflakes. But I know that you've been trying that. I know it.
One of the things we wanted to say before we get into Godfrey's story is if you have questions, then please do put them in the comments as we're talking. And there'll be chance at the end for us to put those to Godfrey and for Godfrey to answer them. So yeah, do put questions in the comments as they come up. And we can see them. And if we need to respond quickly, we can. If not, we'll save them up to the end and put them to Godfrey then. So we've lost Godfrey. There he is.
He's
back.
there.
He's there. So Godfrey, do you want to tell us how kind of we've kind of got a beginning, a middle, and end-ish sort of this story, although it's a long one. But what did life look like for you, kind of prior to the event you're going to talk about a little bit?
Well, I think first I would say the event I'm going to talk about was 50 years ago. But this happened some years before that. I'm probably a bit older than I might appear. And I was brought up in Sri Lanka, or was Ceylon then, just after independence. I was born and brought up there. I certainly remember going to church with my father. He'd often read the lesson. And I actually believed from a very early age that Jesus Christ had risen from the dead. Partly, I think, through reading one or two books like Ben-Hur and The Robe by Lloyd C. Douglas.
Oh, yes. I remember seeing the film. Didn't the film have... Was it with Kirk Douglas? No, I don't remember. I remember the film,
Ben-Hur,
yes.
I think.
Yeah, Ben-Hur. Yeah, thank you. Sorry, interrupted you, Godfrey. Carry on.
So I was brought up there, and then as one did in those days, I got sent back to school in this country at the tender age of 7 and lived with relatives for, until I was 13. So that was quite a long period away from home. And I certainly was a praying person. My prayer was usually, Lord, send me back to my lovely tropical home country. And the Lord spent most of the time not answering that one, apart from a couple of summer holidays, which were absolutely wonderful. But then my parents retired to this country and off to Shropshire. And we got involved, or they got involved with a local church there, which is now very lively, I must say. In fact, I've even spoken there twice in the last couple of years. So that's been really nice in Shropshire. And I certainly was someone who believed that Jesus had risen from the dead. And I read the Bible and I prayed. But I think I would say that there were certain things that I was not really prepared for God to ask me to do, like becoming a missionary, for example, or perhaps becoming a vicar. So there were things that were off limits in my life.
Yes, we thought they were off limits to us as well, Godfrey.
I won that one.
I was going to say, you were obviously more persuasive than we were.
Well, He had other
Okay,
plans
so
for
so
me.
he did clearly, yeah, clearly. So where does the story go from then? So you're reading the Bible, you're praying, you believe that Jesus has risen from the dead. So I think in everybody's book, that's a Christian. That's somebody who is living the life as somebody following Jesus. So how did that go from there?
Well, I was even confirmed, you see. So it was just that there was that sense of unreality, I think. It seemed real and there were answered prayers. And as I look back, things happened in my life that I realized were really rather amazing. I went off to university. I started reading chemistry and then changed from a 4-year course to a 3-year zoology course. Ended up having never done biology, having to do a first year again and doing things like geology options. And I just want to tell one little story, which was amazing. I met my wife Fran there. We were engaged quite early on, and we went up a hill in Shropshire with a friend of ours from university. And as we sat on the top of this thing, I'm afraid I'm very, very nerdy. I was thinking about this hill. This is extraordinary. I wonder what the geology is. Now, I must add that I was doing things like running college balls and all sorts of things, which meant that I did tend to miss part of my practical sessions and my lab sessions come in late. And so I wasn't really hot on geology, but I did have an exam coming up. But as I sat on that hill, I thought, well, I didn't think Lord because I didn't really talk to him then very much. I went down to the nearest town where we lived and looked in the museum, and there was a wonderful section right through the hill of the geology of the hill. Well, 3 months later, the exam came up. We had to interpret a map, and it was a map of anywhere in the country. Its geology, you had to interpret it and show what was going on from the surface features of the map. Well, that went right through that map, it went right through that hill. I'd already studied it in detail. And
Amazing.
as I look back afterwards, I felt God had actually led me through it. I didn't see it at the time, although I thought, gosh, this is really amazing. But that was just an extraordinary thing. God has his hand on you, I'm sure, whether you're following him or not.
Yeah.
And it's how you respond later.
It was almost, part of your journey, was, growing up with faith, wasn't it? Really,
Yeah. Yeah.
and for it not actually quite to make a contact, as it were. I mean, perhaps we wouldn't put it quite like this, but maybe your head was engaged with it, but your heart possibly wasn't. Is that fair to say, or would
I
that?
think the missing bit was the will, actually.
Okay.
I think, as I say, there were certain things I would think. I don't think I heard that. You said I would not actually allow myself to hear a call to go to the mission field or something like that because I had plans. I was very ambitious. I'd set my heart on a particular university, having seen them win the boat race. I thought that's the one for me. And
Which one
at the
is
age of
that?
30, well,
One of
Godfrey.
two.
And it was the place where I met Fran, so that was
Yeah.
great, really. And we got married immediately after leaving there, and went off to Vancouver, British Columbia, where we did some research at the University of British Columbia. And I suppose that's where the next stage of our story began. So we started going to the cathedral in Vancouver, and a couple of guys from the Jesus People turned up one Sunday. At this stage, after about 6 or 8 months there, we were running a Bible study at home,
So
and we
sorry
got
to
a guy.
interrupt you, Godfrey. The Jesus people. So
Oh,
what were they? Was it? How did they come to? They came from California, didn't they? On the West Coast
that's
originally.
right. It's an earlier generation, the Jesus People we've heard about recently.
Right.
These were people who'd been hippies. They'd been into drugs, transcendental meditation,
Okay.
some things which were rather worse than that. But some of them had been profoundly converted and become really, really keen Christians, really radical. And at this stage, Fran and I had been actually having a Bible study in our flat, and a guy who's coming to it, about 20 years older than us, because we were just young graduates, his name was Peter Green, and he told us one day that he'd actually not been a Christian, but his cousin, a fellow called Michael Green, who's actually, he just died a couple of years ago, but a notable Anglican evangelist, had visited Peter in Cambridge where he was working, and after 3 hours with him, persuaded Peter that Jesus had risen from the dead. And then he said, well, what are you going to do about it? And Peter said, well, I'm going to have to follow him. And the following day went into work and said, everything's going to be different. So Peter shared this story with Fran and me and the rest of the group, and I thought, very interesting. And then a few weeks later, in fact, 50 years ago, this March on the 22nd, the Sunday, the 22nd, we were in the cathedral having coffee afterwards, and a couple of these guys were there, and we went off to chat to them. They were remarkable, about our age, but seemed to have had a really amazing story of having been in drugs and things like that and come off it. So we invited them back to lunch, and we had to pick up a couple of others on the way. They said, can we bring our friends? We said, yeah, sure, come along. And afterwards, we drove them to their chapel at the far side of Vancouver, and an experience like nothing we'd been to before. It was certainly not liturgical. Probably the oldest people there were in their 30s, and remember we were mid-20s, and it was jam-packed. And halfway through, lots of singing, and they stopped to pray for a house that was on fire down the road, and we thought, I'm not sure where the liturgy for that is, But,
I don't think that's in common worship, is it? Praying for the house, praying for the house down the road, yeah.
So that's just a sense of the expectancy and imminence of God, His presence, and it was really quite awe-inspiring. A sort of tingling feeling almost. And then they just said at the end, well, if any of the brothers and sisters need prayer for anything, come on up. And I really don't remember making a decision to walk up there for anything. And Fran said she came along too. She felt that she should, so 2 of us are up there. And as I was up there, we knelt on the ground, and a few of them came round me. I felt that the Jesus who I had known since I was a child, who I'd recognized as the one who'd risen from the dead, who I'd prayed to rather, who I actually had answered prayer, but not as frequently. But this was the same Jesus, and I just sensed him saying, I want everything. And for someone who's very ambitious, that's quite scary.
Can I ask, Godfrey, can I ask how you heard that? Was there a sense of hearing a voice, or when we talk about Jesus talking to us, sometimes that can feel a little strange to kind of work out. How did you feel that those words come to you?
Well, I didn't hear a voice. I can't tell if he was tenor or bass.
That's a shame.
It's the inward voice. He didn't speak to me in Hebrew either, or Aramaic or Greek.
No.
So just he was speaking to me saying, I want everything. And I just sensed a real buzz. And we went out of that place thinking, what are we going to do? Because I was prepared to say, yes, I'll do anything, because I recognized this was the one. And Fran said she sort of felt a real sense of light, a sort of sense of his presence. So
did you have anything else in that experience where you had, because I'm sure you'd said when we were talking earlier about there were other signs of Jesus' presence that you'd felt in that moment?
Well, I think they're a bit subjective, really, and not really helpful. One person's experience is the same. You look at St. Paul's description of the Damascus Road, and he's got 3 different experiences. And I find that mine tends to vary with time. And let's be honest, let's go for the minimum one, and at least we won't
Fair enough.
Fair enough.
Okay.
Fair enough.
Yeah. So, what happened next? May I ask that question?
Yeah, no, I was going to ask you. I mean, I was going to say we just so that the people are aware, we kind of talk these through a little bit, and I know there's it would seem to me that what you'd been saying from that point on, just things seem to keep happening, and amazing experiences, not every week, but just some incredible things happen. Is that fair to say, Godfrey?
Well, that's true, and just link in that guy Peter Green, because the following day we just were wondering, well, what do we do? Do I up sticks and join this group, which some people might have thought it was a cult even. It did become a cult actually after 6 months. Someone came in and bulldozed his way and changed it, and some of the people we knew escaped and went to normal churches. But what do we do? I was on a Commonwealth scholarship, which had a time limit and things to do there. And so I picked up the phone and rang Peter, and he said, I was waiting for you to ring. He'd seen us go
Okay.
out and thought that something might happen. And he came along and he just said, well, you know, there are two things that are really important. If you believe that God raised Jesus from the dead, and if you're prepared to confess him as Lord, in other words, say he's boss, you shall be saved. In other words, that's really what it means to be a Christian. Jesus is Lord. He has the driving keys. He's got the keys to your life, the car of your life, if you see what I mean. And you're now in the passenger seat. And we said, yes, we want this. So he gave us a copy of J.B. Phillips' little New Testament. It just read like a love letter. We sat down at lunchtime on campus each day, and we just powered through it. And it was absolutely gripping, whereas previously it had been more of academic interest.
And you mentioned to me about a journey you had in your car that was all part of the same kind of 2-year period. You bumped into somebody, picked up a hitchhiker.
Oh, yes. Well, that was actually in context. We'd started going to a prayer meeting on the north shore of Vancouver, which meant going across not the Golden Gate Bridge, the Lions Gate Bridge, which is similar. The wonderful mountains and, the huge sort of fjord, and then up to this house where very ordinary Anglican people, but there was just such a sense of love and buzz there. And we knew this is what we'd been reading about. My father had sent us a book by a guy called Michael Harper, an Anglican clergyman, and he talked in this book, Power for the Body of Christ, how the power that comes on people at Pentecost is available today, and how you can receive that power to live a Christian life and be able to share God's love with other people. And so we asked them to pray for us. And we went away and tried to pray in the ways that they encouraged us to do and during the course of this week. And then halfway through the week, I had to drive down to the city centre of Vancouver from the campus. And as I was driving along, I saw a thumb go out for a lift. And as was typical in those days in Vancouver, you picked up hitchhikers, no problem. And as the guy got in the car, I suddenly realized he was wearing a saffron robe, a yellow robe. And I thought, oh, I never saw that. That's weird. I just never saw that he was wearing this. It's a bit like going through, red traffic lights. So you should see things like that.
Yeah.
And he got in the car and uh, he said to me as we started off, he said, I'm a Buddhist. Let me tell you about it. So after a few minutes, he said, telling me that, I said, well, actually, I'm a Christian. Would you like to hear about my story? And he said, oh, yeah. So we pulled in off the road, and for about 10 minutes, I talked to him about things that had just happened to us over the previous year. And he said, oh, gee, you've told me all sorts of things I can't help you with. Perhaps if we go back to the commune, the leader will sort you out. Okay, Lord, you brought me here. Let's see what happens next. So I drove him down to the commune and he disappeared inside. And I thought, Lord, what do I do now? And there was a Bible in the car and I picked it up and opened it. And it just fell open on the words, if you speak the words I shall give you, I will be like a wall of bronze around you and they will turn to you and you will not turn to them. And I thought, well, that's pretty good news. And so the leader of this commune came and sat next to me, and I said, "Have you been involved in Christian things at all? Do you know anything about Jesus?" And he said, "Well, I was a Catholic, but it didn't make sense, so I have joined this thing. I'm now running this commune." So I said, "Well, maybe you didn't actually meet Jesus. Maybe you need to know him." And so for about 5-10 minutes, we just talked about Jesus, and at the end he said, I've never heard anything like that. And that was when I had to go on into town and left him. So who knows where he went from there. But that was that rather strange story. But going back next week to the prayer group, the meeting, they said, "Has anything happened to you this week?" And we said, "No, nothing much. It's been." And I said, "Oh, yeah, I had this strange time with the Bible actually spoke to me, or God spoke to me through the Bible, and it was really rather remarkable." So
So that
that
was that
was
moment that so from where you were before, where it was as you said, I didn't really speak to God. You were sitting on the top of the hill, the mountain, looking down, and but you've got this, begin to have this inner dialogue going on with, there's a relationship in a way that maybe has come to fruit from this experience. Is that fair to say that, Godfrey? It seems to me that you're aware of where God might actually be living and speaking into your daily life in a way that you wouldn't have expected it before.
Well, I think so, because I think, having just said, "I will give you everything, here are the car keys of my life," you actually got to know when you wake up in the morning that he's going to drive you somewhere. So it
Yeah.
really becomes rather important to keep in touch. And very soon after this experience had happened to us, I was asked to speak at the University of British Columbia Students' Union, Christian Union. And so I talked about what had happened to us, our faith and that. And an undergraduate came up afterwards and said, "Gee, you're an Anglican and a zoologist. How can you possibly be a Christian?"
Oh,
And
wow.
had to work that one out ever since. He was worried because he was going to university classes in zoology, and the evolution had really upset him, and he just thought this was incompatible. How could I, as a zoologist, be doing this? So I went away thinking, well, okay, Lord, I need to know what I'm doing, why I'm doing this. Do you want me to continue? Because I was on a research project which involved various genetic and evolutionary type projects, an ecological project. And actually, I had an amazing experience because having asked this question, and I'd had a fairly wet year and I hadn't got as much field work done, it was really becoming urgent. I got results. I went to the first lake to catch the char I was working on. They're called char. And I ended up with 200 trout,
Oh,
which is
gosh.
not very good, apart from the freezer, which probably shouldn't have done. But anyway, having measured them and got their guts out for analysis and all that other stuff, and that was great. But I hadn't got what I wanted. So the week after, I was really getting quite anxious, and Fran came with me to help, and another Christian friend. We took the boat out, camped. There was a log cabin. Fran made the supper while we went out for the first set of nets. And I was putting them out in this lake. Imagine this, surrounded by huge mountains, snow covered at the top, and big forest trees, and then a view to the west, a lower area. So you could see the sea glistening 30 miles away, and lovely sunshine. And then the clouds came, turned black, thunder, lightning, hailstones bouncing off our metal boat, and then crackling of lightning. And I said, "We're going in, David." He said, "I've got faith to stay." I said, "I haven't. We're going in." So we ran up to the wooden hut, and I was actually very cross with the Lord. I said, "Lord, what are you trying to tell me? I'm here to try and do this. Do you want me to stop this and go back to Britain? Is that what you're after?" And Fran said, "Oh, come on, you better pray about it." So we prayed that the weather would change, and within 5 minutes or so, brilliant sunshine, which is, I may add, just what you'd expect from a mountain storm. Back on the lake, the nets, these are 100 yards long. That one which we dropped in, full flow was absolutely perfectly set. So that was great. We got the others out, came back in, and Fran ran down saying, "Do you know what? There were 2 Bibles in that room that we'd been praying in. They were both open at Psalm 97, which says words to the effect of, "The Lord reigns, at his lightnings the people tremble, the coastlands stand in awe of him." And we were in what's called coastal British Columbia. And I said, "Lord, I know what you're saying. You are sovereign over the environment. Everything that happens to us, to animals, etc. This is because you actually govern the way the seasons turn. You regulate the way the environment works," which for me was a real changer. It has seen me through the rest of my teaching career, which has only I'm still teaching actually.
And so in a way that all those things connect you to the work you do for the diocese, um, in terms of the eco-church movement. I know you've got a passion for ecology. I know you have been a leader actually across. I know you've been in some very high-level meetings in the Church of England, trying to encourage the Church of England to have a negative footprint, so that's been very much connected with your journey, and part of that, it seems to me, has been, you're continuing. What do you want me to do, Lord? Asking the question of God and seeking Him and continuing to follow Him. Tell me, Godfrey, there's one final thing I just wanted to ask you. I think it's a great example of God's presence, and that you told me a story a little while ago. In fact, you told us on Tuesday night about standing in Coventry and then meeting somebody.
Oh yeah. When I first came back to England, I ended up teaching at a funny little school. Um, I accepted the job, by the way, because having gone home, having been asked on the spot whether I'd take it, something you're always a bit suspicious about. There was a letter from a pastor in Vancouver who ended off, "Do be strong and of good courage, for the Lord your God is with you wherever you go." And I thought, well, wherever, even this funny little school, that's fine. And it's a place where I learnt to make my mistakes teaching. I didn't go through teacher training, although I ended up teaching the PGC science course at Warwick, which is ironic. But anyway, this school had been 4 years I was teaching there, and it had been a place where I knew I'd made mistakes in, coping with kids, but God was very gracious and helped me to get through those. And I left because I felt God wanted to move on, and that I can't continue teaching in schools for another 30 years. But I was in Coventry at Central Six about 2 years ago, and I was waiting under just by the shop that sells all the arts material. I forget its name. And waiting for a friend to come and pick me up in the car, and I just sensed that there was someone about 10 yards behind me who was looking at me. Do you ever get that feeling? Slightly, it's sort of a bit spooky. Anyway, especially as he got long white hair and looked fairly elderly, and I'd never seen him before. He looked slightly, And as I looked at him, he suddenly said, came up to me and said, "Hello, sir. Are you Mr. Armitage?" And to be asked, "Hello, sir," by a guy who looks older than you with white hair, it was Christopher K. I've given him a different name, but he was one of my naughty boys, and he said, "I've been wanting to see you for years, because when you taught us, you had in your study a poster, and it had an American footballer with his head in his hands, and he was saying, 'I give up.' And the caption underneath was, 'Jesus, I didn't give up.' And that made a real impression on me," he said. I started going to a local church, and then I met my now wife, and we got married. I became a Christian, and I've often wanted to tell you and to thank you for that poster. And here you are. And what was remarkable was that school had been in Bristol. I'd never seen him since. He lives in Bristol still. He happened to be in Coventry, waiting there for his wife to pick him up, because his mother-in-law lived 3 blocks away. Small world.
Well, thank you so much, Godfrey, for your stories, and we could continue and talk to you all night about some of the other things in your life that have happened. We are just giving you an opportunity if there's any questions, particularly about some of the experiences we're talking about. We do have our 4 questions that we like to ask people we interview, and so far, and we have given you a little heads up on this. So the first question, this quick fire question, is best day of your life.
Well, I've got to say, when Fran and I got married.
Yes, Fran is watching. She's very happy. She's punching the sky. Okay, that's fine. Favorite day? Sorry, favorite day. Sorry, carry on. Yes.
Well, can I just share one amazing experience, because
Yeah,
it's
go
just
ahead.
the sense of the awe of God. I don't know if you can put me on full screen for a moment.
Yep.
Does it show? That's the question.
Yeah, hang on. Let me go. There you go.
Let's see what it
Yeah,
is.
we can see it.
That's it.
It's a pretty wild place. I should have got a slide of that or something, but there's nothing there. There's no water. It's a lava desert in Iceland, and my group had run out of water. Okay, and at midnight I set out. The sun was shining, to see if I could get the water that we'd passed early and we hadn't filled up adequately. And as I walked past this huge ice fall and a massive end of a glacier with all the moraines, on my own with the sunshine and just the wind coming down from the north gently and the warmth of the sky just below the Arctic Circle, I just had such a sense of God's presence. It was an extraordinary place.
So that's another good day.
Well, a good day, or favourite place, maybe that. And now, you asked us last time, your favourite life hack. Did you manage to come up with a life hack, Godfrey?
No, as I say, I don't really know what a life hack is.
Well,
you see,
Abby will have one, I'm sure.
Okay, so cutting mangoes by cutting them in half and turning them inside out and doing a grid so that you can just slice it off. That's a bit of a life hack if you like a mango.
Oh, that sounds good. Yes.
And the final question we have for you tonight, and thank you so much for all you've said, is what does living life to the full mean to you in your daily life?
I suppose it really means actually knowing that you're walking in God's way. And that sounds very arrogant, but there comes a sort of sense of familiarity if you're at home and you're doing things with your spouse, with your family. You know that you're doing things that please them, and you know that there are other things which might not be so convenient, like leaving dirty socks on the floor or that sort of stuff, or but there's a sense of knowing what God is saying and hearing his voice. It says, you shall hear a word in your ear. Your teacher will tell you, this is the way, walk in it. And it comes, I think, with familiarity, with doing it again and again. And so that's part of the regular rhythm of life, that God becomes more familiar and you sense. But that doesn't mean that he doesn't tell you sometimes to make really, really big changes. And when you do that, you've got to be prepared to jump. And I've had to do that 3 times in my life, jumping from a secure job to nothing because I knew it was the right time, and knowing that that's the time that I would have to trust him to take me on to the next stage.
Amazing.
Well, that's wonderful. Thank you for that, Godfrey, very much.
I suppose the whole experience, Godfrey, this idea of surrender really is what we're talking about, being faithful to God's call, which is where that kind of pivot moment in Vancouver seems to have played out, is that, from believing, knowing that Jesus was real and had died for us and had risen from the dead, to actually believing and being willing to take the consequences of believing that in your life and to follow him fully. And there's that pivot there in Vancouver where that's happened, and that I think there's a real sense of how that then takes you into that life in all its fullness, isn't it? As you say, that to get to the next step, sometimes you have to be prepared to put the last step down. And it just made me think there's an amazing verse that I've loved for a long time now, in Galatians 2, Paul's letter to the Galatians. So I have been crucified with Christ, and I no longer live, but Christ lives in me. The life I now live in the body, I live by faith in the Son of God who loved me and gave himself for me. And just listening to your story, that sense of the Spirit working in you and through you and with you, that idea of Christ in you, and sort of living in your life lived with him, just really struck me as I was listening to your story.
So
I was just going to say, he doesn't actually ask you to do things that you don't want to do. I never wanted to be a missionary, but I ended up going on 2 short-term missions to Zambia, and they were wonderful, such fun and stuff. So
So there we are. I mean, so I was just going to say, my wife Sandra, she would never go to any the stories or when missionaries came to church, just in case she got the call to go overseas. But although she didn't get the call to go overseas, she got the call to go to Coventry. So there we are, and we're very happy to be here. Very happy to be here. So thank you, Godfrey, so much for tonight. Really appreciate giving your evening with us. So just leaves for us to say thanks for being with us, and I think maybe we'll finish with that verse that we remember from last year, that's on the wall of our church. We pray tonight, may the God of hope fill you with all joy and peace. Good night.
Good night.
Good night.